Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Britton's Hangout Hour, episode 106. I am here today with James Wade, the author of such books as All Things Left Wild. I got my copy here. Rivers Sing Out, Beasts of the Earth, and your new one's called Hollow Out of Dark.
Hollow out the dark, yes, sir.
Hollow Out the Dark. My bad. Um, You've been compared to Cormac McCarthy and Larry McMurtry. Though I'll admit I've read my first Larry McMurtry book this year with Lonesome Dove, which was very good. Noted you've been praised by William Kent Kruger, and some friends of mine recently read Ordinary Grace from him. I think is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
You've been praised by the guy who wrote the book "The Wettest County in the World." I think it's Matt Bordneau.
Bondurant.
Bondurant, thank you. Yeah, was made into the movie Lawless, and I thought I saw Joe Lansdale give you a blurb, but I could be wrong about that. But glad that you're here today.
Oh man, I appreciate you having me. 106 episodes is pretty crazy. I gotta say, I haven't watched all 106, but the few that I've looked at, man, you're sharp. You know your stuff, and so it's always cool to talk to somebody that knows what they're talking about. And so that was, I think, probably my biggest desire to come on and visit with you about books and writing and everything. And so yeah, can count me as a fan, man.
Thank you. Yeah, I read All Things Left Wild this January, and I really liked it. I would describe it as if Cormac McCarthy took a crack at True Grit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
It has that similar kind of scrappy characters going on an adventure to avenge a past wrong, and then just that McCarthy-esque just bleakness just thrown in there, and it's like, damn, dude, you just punished them. God.
Yeah, it's
You really like punishing your characters.
Well, I do, and I mean, of course, that's kind of an old quote from every writer ever, right? Is to put your characters into a bunch of terrible situations and all that. But it's funny because with All Things Left Wild, and you mentioned this about the book too, and I wholeheartedly agree. Is like this the first book I ever wrote, not just my debut novel, but the first manuscript that I ever actually wrote. I feel like I just really honestly got, a lot of stuff in publishing is luck and timing, and I think I just kind of got lucky at the right time for that to even be picked up, because there were so many things I've learned since then. And when I go back to it, like, it's not that I don't like Cormac McCarthy comparisons, because obviously, I mean, I know you're a fan. I'm certainly
I was
a
about to
super
say,
fan.
the first place I found you was an article they did after he died, and I think you provided a quote for it.
Yeah, yeah, and so like being in that orbit is like, that's very humbling and all that stuff. But at the same time, like, when I look back at All Things Left Wild, I'm kind of like, this is really just me having not really knowing how to go about fully crafting a novel yet, and just
Mm.
kind of relying on, like, oh well, I really like Cormac McCarthy. How would he do it?
Yeah,
So
I
each
think
book.
I thought, because we're friends on Goodreads, I think I saw you had a thing for one of your books, and you said I'm not quite there yet. So,
Yeah, yeah,
which I was probably one of the more like honest things I've read from an author.
well, I always rate my own books on Goodreads, and unlike a lot of authors who give themselves a 5 just to like help the rating, I'd never given myself a 5 because I've never written a 5 novel. Just in my opinion, I know that I'm not trying to be dismissive of readers and fans who really like what I do,
yeah,
but I'm just
don't
like,
try to get people to not read your books. I thought
yeah,
All
yeah, of
Things
course.
Left
No, of
Wild were
course.
good.
I just feel like there's always. I feel like you start out as a writer with something in your head of like this perfect novel, and then you attempt to get there, you fall short, and that's okay because you learn a thing or two, and so maybe you can take a half step forward for your next one, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm hoping that I've gotten a little better with each book, but I still, I mean, for me anyway, it just still feels like there's just more out there to strive for, and maybe that's the way it's supposed to be, right? Maybe if I ever wrote like what I considered like a perfect book, maybe I would never write again. And so, that's kind of what keeps me going, is just trying to be better as a thinker and a reader and a writer and all that stuff. But yeah, and it's all that was to say that I loved what you had to say about All Things Left Wild, because I thought you were well, first of all, you're very kind to the book, but then you were also very fair in your critique of it. And as I'm watching it, I'm going, yep, yep, and then I'm just nodding along with everything you're saying. And so yeah, sometimes it's not always like the things that we like or that we praise, that as it is like the little things where we find what could be better, and what
Yeah,
could.
it's kind of funny you mentioned that. I actually, because we were having this conversation, I'm like, you know what? I haven't actually reviewed All Things Left Wild yet, so I think I'll just give it a shot next week on my channel, but we'll see how it goes. I haven't seen a lot of people, like, talk about you on YouTube. I've seen, like, you've been interviewed by people. Like, apparently your wife is an influencer of sorts. That was pretty cool, seeing you two together.
Yeah, she's done pretty much everything under the sun when it comes to like marketing and social media stuff. And before she got pregnant with our son, she had started flipping furniture and had a channel kind of devoted to that, and that kind of took off for her. And but even before that, back before we had kids, when we were just in the RV, we traveled. My wife and I traveled the country for about 2 years, living off grid, living in Bureau of Land Management land, national forest, anywhere that you can stay for a couple weeks at a time, before you have to come back and plug in, just basically to like wash clothes and take a shower. But yeah, and so even during all that, like she kind of was very in tune as to what does and doesn't work branding wise, and it's all that stuff that like I'd rather not even mess with. But in this day and age, you kind of have to a little bit. Once you get an agent and a publisher and all that stuff, you kind of have to have at least some sort of social media presence. So I basically just closed my eyes and picked Instagram because it seemed like the most friendly to me, and so that's kind of where I am on the social media stuff. But yeah, I haven't been on YouTube much. Like I think we have a channel maybe, that we've done like some just kind of goofing around videos on. I do have a Facebook, but I'm hardly ever on it. Really, for me, it's just been kind of Instagram is the only thing that I've push the books on, just kind of because, like I said, you just kind of have to. It still makes me feel a little icky to do it, but
You can't be like McCarthy or Thomas Pynchon and just hole up in a house somewhere, and people don't even know. People are even argue if you exist. Like that.
I don't know if we'll ever see another author that is like starting now that could get to that eventually. But man,
no,
that's
the dream, like, reclusive,
right?
And like not really wanting interviews and all that.
Well, that's what I mean. Is like now you kind of have to do this stuff, or else you kind of disappear in a bad way, right? Like not the cool reclusive way, but like the nobody's talking about your books way. But if I ever, that's kind of the goal, right? Like if somebody asked me what's your version of success, it wouldn't be there would be no number of sales, no specific number of like copies sold or money made. It would literally just be success would be if I could keep writing books and not have to be on social media.
Yeah, I mean, social media isn't always a fun place. I can sympathize with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It just brings out the worst. But on the flip side, I know it also connects people in a great way. And like it's not. I mean, with anything, it's probably a lot more nuanced than what I'm making it. But just for me personally, I mean, it's just the vitriol and the hatred that you see in comment sections. Even the good things on there become a time suck, and it's like, dude, I could be writing right now, or something. But
well, yeah, no, it's yeah, it's not easy always being on the internet all the time. But I think it's nice when we do things like this, where we can hang out for a while and talk about books or whatever comes to mind.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know what genre you would go by. I mean, I would call All Things Left Wild a western, but I have thought about trying River Sing Out, but I just haven't gotten it yet. So
yeah, it's All Things Left Wild. I think definitely fits the smoothest of any of the other books because it is pretty obviously a Western. I like to say, like, if I tell someone I'm a novelist and they say, "Oh, well, what do you write?" and I say, "Well, I write literary fiction," and usually the answer is like, "What is that?" Right?
Uh
And
huh.
so it's a little easier to say, "Well, my first book was a Western, and then I also wrote River Sing Out." I would call like a modern crime thriller because it takes place present day. And then for Beast of the Earth, I don't know what you would call that. Like, it's because it's like the '80s, so I mean that's not really. I mean, it's a story. It's not what people what comes to mind when somebody thinks historical fiction. So maybe call that a crime thriller or a mystery or something. And then certainly with Hollow Out the Dark, which just came out August 20th, that I'm comfortable calling either historical fiction or crime or historical crime or something because there's so much of it is rooted in the history of the Great Depression and Prohibition and a lot of just historical things that carry weight in the plot. But then also it is a crime.
There needs to.
It's a crime thriller as well. So
Yeah, I've been looking for a Hollow Out the Dark. I don't know if it's just it probably is because I can be a really bad looker at times, but I can't see, I haven't found it at my local Barnes and Noble or anything like that. So maybe I'll
oh,
keep
you
my eyes
gotta you,
peeled.
you got you gotta ask them to order it, because then that helps me too, right?
You're like, yeah, do you guys have this book? It just came out like almost a month ago. Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah,
So
time has been flying. We've been at basically two bookstores a week for the last 3-4 weeks now, and I'm flying to Atlanta this weekend to do some bookstores there and a writing conference. And so, yeah, it's been when these books come out, like you want to promote them as hard as you can, but it's tiring, and then of course it takes away from the writing and editing of other books, which is really the only thing that I want to do. And it's not that I don't enjoy this, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to folks, but yeah, always in the back of my mind, I'm like, I just wish I could be alone, alone and writing and working on the next one.
yeah, no, it's a yeah, I imagine that can be kind of kind of stressful unless somehow you figure out how to cope with it, as some popular writers have done. Uh,
Right.
yeah, it's. Uh, I've talked to a lot of like indie authors. I haven't talked to some, or I don't know, or well, let me think about it. I don't know if I've talked to someone who's been traditionally published. So yet, anyway.
Yeah, it's I have friends who are both traditionally published and with bigger houses. I have some folks who were small, traditionally published but kind of small boutique publishers,
Mm.
and then I have plenty of friends who just self-publish, and it's interesting to me just kind of to hear the range of experience, from one to the other, and where things are the same and where they're different. And yeah, it's kind of fascinating. Like this, it's definitely not a one size fits all industry anymore, right? I mean, there's so many different avenues that you can take to getting your work out there, and so it's been fascinating to kind of hear everybody's different experiences in that.
Yeah, it's been interesting for me because I used to think of like self pub as like something you do like when you're just like, oh, I just want to share this with like my friends and family and all that, and it's not really serious. But no, it's becoming like a serious thing now. Like there's actual authors who are there's some of them that are making it. There's a lot of them who are they've just got enough of a following where they can just do
Right.
fine and not really need to worry about I'm sure it's a lot different than it is in trad publishing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like,
Because like
so
I've heard in trad publishing, they do a lot of the promotion and stuff for you, which I imagine is nice.
it is. I mean, it's there's I feel like there's probably trade offs for in both, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
certainly, like I love having a publicist and a marketing team at Blackstone Publishing that does so much for me. But at the same time, you're paying them essentially to do that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're only getting a percentage of the book sales, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
you're like I've talked recently to some folks who were previously traditionally published,
Mm.
and then they're like, you know what? Every book that the publisher puts out, it seems to sell, somewhere between like 2 to 5,000 copies, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere in that range. And they're like, and that very rarely does that earn out my advance, or if it does, I'm barely making royalties. But if I could just keep, half of those readers and then sell the book myself at $25 or whatever they're going to sell it at, they're like, I think I can actually make more money doing that. And it's almost like, yeah, okay, I kind of see how that works out. But then you're usually giving up the chance at kind of some of the more major awards, or at like a book really hitting and taking off in a way that, that is just career making, or whatever. And so there is that kind of trade off. But yeah, I've talked to multiple traditionally published authors who have switched to self publishing later in their careers, and then vice versa. Like my buddy Scott Simmergren, the author of Codger and the Sparrow, he wrote, I want to say, either 9 or 10 novels, self-published all of them over, a couple, like over, I want to say 2 decades. And during that time, he was actively trying to, find an agent, get a publishing deal, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And it just didn't work. The timing didn't work out. I mean, he's a great writer, but the timing just didn't work out. And so with his last novel, he ended up getting an agent and getting a publisher in, I believe, TCU Press up in Fort Worth. And so, and who could say why? Like with this specific novel, as opposed to his, the 9 or 10 that came before it. But yeah, it's been fascinating, because I think that he's probably now doing that same thing, where he's like, okay, these were the benefits of self-publishing. Here's what I had to trade in to be traditionally published, but here's what I got back. And yeah, it's fascinating to me, right? Because I'm under contract with a publisher right now, but who knows what's going to happen when that contract ends?
You don't have that. You don't have that like McCarthy, where you can just kind of send in whatever you want, because like you're like that infamous. Not
yeah,
quite there
right,
yet.
Exactly. Well, but even McCarthy. So, as I'm sure you know, McCarthy spent 20+ years writing great novels, and they just didn't sell, right? And so
yeah,
the only thing that kept him from being dropped from his publisher was the fact that Albert Erskine, his editor and a higher up at the publishing house, was like, this guy's brilliant, these novels are brilliant, we just have to hang on to him until he hits big, and I promise you it'll hit big. It's just gonna, it'll take a while. And so for 20+ years, Albert Erskine is running around securing grants for McCarthy, securing awards for McCarthy, and so and that's the kind of shit that just doesn't happen anymore, right? Like I love my publishing house, but there's no way that there's somebody there that's going to go around and make sure that if my books aren't selling at a certain rate, that like, oh well, we got to make sure James has money. Like, no, it's not. It just doesn't work that way anymore. It's a business, and it has been a business for a long time. And that's, whether that's the sad truth or just the truth, I don't know, but it is the truth. And
I think what's interesting about Blackstone, because I looked at their website a little bit because I was checking out your books. They have a real like fluidity with what they publish, which I really like. So they don't publish just like literary novels like yours, or I don't know what. Like, when you said literary fiction, so I'll just say literary. And I've also seen, like, science fiction and fantasy books on there, and crime novels on there, and, like, thrillers. I mean, it's quite neat, I think.
Oh, they're great, and they have grown so rapidly. They started in the 1980s as just an audiobook company, and so all the major publishing houses would basically outsource their audiobooks to Blackstone. Well, eventually those other companies grew, and they added their own audio departments. So Blackstone did the reverse of that, and they said, well, if y'all are going to add your own audio departments, we're going to add our own print department. And so they got into printing books, and I want to say it's only been a little over 10 years or so. Maybe it's been 15 years since they did that, and they have grown in that time period so rapidly. They just printed Robert Downey Jr.'s cookbook, Whoopi Goldberg's memoir, Kenny G's memoir. I mean, it's kind of all over the place.
You're just walking around with giants, it seems.
Well, yeah, not me. I'm just at the same publishing house, but I'm certainly not rubbing shoulders with them. but yeah, it has been fascinating to watch Blackstone kind of grow in that manner. And yeah, I mean, my prediction would be, because to your point, Britton, they have kind of all of this variety of
Mm-hmm.
things that they publish. I would guess that as they continue to grow, at some point they will kind of split into like imprints or
Mm.
whatever, so that
Mm.
they can have certain people that focus just on the science fiction novels or just on the celebrity memoirs, or whatever it may be. Because I think that they're at that. I mean, they're big time now. They with Geneva Rose, they had a New York Times bestseller, and I mean, anything she puts
Yeah, I
out is
mean,
going to sell
I was looking through the website,
thousands.
and I'll admit I was a little confused. I'm like, good lord, there's like a wealth of books over here.
Well, and they've bought a lot of back catalogs as well, which is a really savvy business move. So they're printing like Michael Crichton and Johnny Boggs and all these folks. They're printing their back catalogs. They reissued Hemingway and Fitzgerald with like these cool
Oh
special
wow,
edition covers.
okay.
So yeah, so just like a lot of like really cool, both cool moves and also savvy business moves kind of coming together. So yeah, I can't I can't say enough about them. I think they're going to be a major player for a really long time to come in the publishing industry. So
Yeah, no, I just think they're interesting because like I have written a novel of my own, which is a dark fantasy. I am working on my own western right now. It's stalled at the moment. I keep trying to get back to it, but I just keep getting busy with other things. But yeah, I mean, I'll admit I'm a little cynical of my chances in traditional publishing, but I would be tempted to see how Blackstone would take to it, but we'll see. Whenever I make up
oh
my mind on that.
oh man, I can't recommend it enough. Give them a shot. I don't. I have no idea what their submission stuff looks like. I
Though
don't know if
apparently
you
I have
have
to
to have an
submit to an
agent or if you
agent
can submit.
first. Did you submit to an agent first, or did you submit to Blackstone?
Yeah, yeah. No, I submitted. So I queried agents when I finished All Things Left Wild back in the summer of 2018.
Mm,
I queried a handful of agents and was lucky enough to form a relationship with Mark Gottlieb at Trident Media,
mm.
and he was the one that brokered the deal with Blackstone for All Things Left Wild, and actually the first three books. All things we got a deal for All Things Left Wild, and then two books after it. So, but yeah, it was I was just kind of, so like I said, I didn't know anything. Not that I know a ton now, but I knew even less then about what the publishing industry is. And basically, I had heard that, oh, you're supposed to get an agent, and then the agent does this, does the deal for you. And so I was like, okay, well, let's, I've got the book, let's find the agent. And so I just went about it that way. And it's almost like I said, it's kind of lucky that I didn't know more, because when there's only one path in front of you, you take that path, and so
Hmm.
that's what I did, and it just happened to work out.
Yeah, I have a friend named Amanda who, funnily enough, also lives in Texas, and she's always like, "Well, if you're gonna do trad pub, you should probably go for an agent first." I'm like, "Ah, okay, that makes sense."
Yeah, I think most publishers definitely want to have the agent do the submission instead of the author. It's gatekeeping, but at the same time, I get it. I mean, these guys get so many. Like agents themselves get so many query letters, and then publishing houses get so many book submissions that it's kind of like a filtering system in a way. And then
Yeah, no, yeah, it's. I mean, again, I haven't. I'm totally talking out of my ass here. I don't know a lot about how publishing works, but um, I mean, I've watched some favorite authors of mine talk about querying and just
yeah.
how much of a pain it is.
Oh God.
And like I've even heard horror stories that it took like 70 tries. I'm like, oh my god, I can't. Oh, how do you do it?
No, yeah, that is. I mean, that's so true. I've heard those same stories. Like, and it's just, to me, what's so brutal about it. And when I talk to writers who are kind of at that stage when they've written the novel and now they're querying, I feel bad telling them how important it is, because it's like, dude, I just wrote an 80,000 word novel, and you're telling me that my chances rest on this 200 word letter, and like that's so tough, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I wish there was another way, but it's like, yeah, no, you've got to write like a really crisp one page query letter that basically says what the novel is, who you are, like what the themes are, and hope that that's enough to get the agent to then, look at the full manuscript and offer you representation. But yeah, it's just a tough pill to swallow, man. It's just like it shouldn't be that way, but it is. And you're right about like I know people that have absolutely sent 70, 80. I know a few people that have sent hundreds of queries, certainly in their in their lifetime, and either not had any luck or maybe they had luck with the 100th one, and that's kind of that weird little hope thing that's like where hope can be cruel because you never know, it might be that last like query letter that you're like, I'm not going to send any more. Yeah, but what if this last one is the one that actually hits? So
yeah, I mean, I guess my kind of nightmare scenario is I waste like 10 years trying to do it, and then you're just like, well.
And you're like, dude, I could have published this myself 10 years
exactly,
ago. Right?
Yeah. And especially now, how, self-publishing is going. I mean, I don't know if, again, I don't know how they would react to something like All Things Left Wild. I don't know what the Western indie scene looks like. I'm more familiar with the fantasy indie scene, which is blown up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that
but fantasy's a popular genre, and like Westerns are
right.
Well, they're a popular movie genre because I'll admit I'm more fond of the movie genre than literature. Though I've been getting better at it though. Like I said, I read Lonesome Dove this year.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't think anybody could blame you for that. If you look at like line graphs or whatever that show like the popularity of Western novels, it used to be where romance and sci-fi and fantasy are now, but it's absolutely tapered off over the years, and it's experiencing a little bit of a resurgence now, but even that resurgence is compared to where it's not experiencing a resurgence as compared to other genres, right? And so like I have friends who are Western writers and they just want to believe so badly that like it's making this huge comeback, and it is compared to where it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago even, but not compared to where romance is, which drives the whole industry. Where thrillers now have again, I was looking at, I think it was the New York Times that had this article a few weeks ago, and it had all these graphs, and like thrillers used to be down at the bottom of the barrel, and now they're a huge chunk of the industry. So yeah, I mean, everything just kind of ebbs and flows. The one thing I will say, like sci-fi and fantasy have kind of always held though, like near the top, and that's
they're popular genres. I mean,
it is. It's super popular, and rightfully so. Because I think fantasy for me, I was talking to a fantasy writer friend of mine, and we were talking about how fantasy is like the closest in language, I feel like, in prose to like true literary fiction. Like there's just a similar elevation, it feels like, of language. And so then when you combine that elevation of language with the escapism of fantasy, because let's be honest, like literary fiction 90% of the time is a fucking downer, dude. It's just, like it is.
Yeah.
It's bleak. And so you get that escapism of fantasy and sci-fi, and then also kind of that elevated prose. And all of a sudden you got like these, magical worlds that people can escape into, but while still feeling challenged by the storytelling and the character development and all that stuff. It doesn't feel just like a throwaway beach read, So anyway, that's just my spiel. But all books are good, and there's room in the zeitgeist for all of it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's I've also noticed. I mean, especially with like fantasy, because it's a genre I really like. So I've noticed like the trends and how, as you said, the ebbs and flows of it, like romance and the romantasy is what they call it now is blown up recently.
Yeah.
I don't get it. I read a part of Fourth Wing. I'm like, I don't know how this got published, but if you like it, God bless you. Well,
Yeah, I feel like
it might be a man thing. I don't know. Like, it's probably it.
It could be. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I forget what book he was talking about. It wasn't Fourth Wing, but it was some book that was wildly popular. And he was like, I want to understand, right? And he's like, so I read the first few pages, and it's just like it's borderline unreadable, and I think everybody has that, right? Like I know there are so many books, man, that like they just blow up, and then you look at them and you're like, I don't understand how. Or the reverse, right? There are books that I read that I'm just absolutely bowled over by. I'm like, this was so good, and it just, kind of gets a lukewarm reception in the world. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
wow, like how did this not, how is this author not bigger? And so, again, luck, timing, culture, trends, what's sexy, I don't know, man. I think if you worry too much about that stuff, certainly from the writing side of it, you'll drive yourself crazy. You won't write anything that's true. You won't write anything that like you're actually proud of. And so you just kind of have to ignore it, which is hard, right? Because it's like no, like you want to sell books in the sense that like not for any kind of fame and fortune, but just so you can keep writing.
Well, yeah,
Like
of
that's
course, yeah.
that's my thing is I need one book to carry me to the next book while also being able to pay for my kids. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which I did say this to you when we were talking on Instagram, but congrats on the new kid.
thank you.
Um,
Yeah, we've got a girl and a boy now, and we're done. We're out, man. That's it. That's it. One was one, but somehow two is 10. I don't know how that happened, but it feels like a madhouse around here most days.
yeah, they're. I don't have kids myself yet, but I imagine it can be. I've heard from other parents. We'll say
Yeah. Well,
my
I'll
parents.
I'll I'll say this: the writing time has definitely gone down, right?
Yeah, no, those kids they'll be like, hey dad, what's going on? Can
Yeah,
I
that's
eat?
it.
What are we eating?
24/7, man.
Or like, I just went to the bathroom. What do you want me to do? Like, I need to help me.
That's so accurate, man. Every single part of your life now is just like revolves around them.
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
writing time is precious and has to happen a lot quicker now than it used to, and so that's been a challenge. But again, back to trade-offs, right? Like it's a trade-off because now you also get to experience this insanely different part of life that quite honestly I wasn't sure that I was ever going to experience, and is certainly nothing that I could ever have imagined or come up with on my own. It's a wholly unique experience, and I'm happy to be able to have it. But also also sometimes I'm like, oh God, I just want a few hours to read and write, and center myself a little bit.
Yeah, that's been me with college. I'm going to college for journalism, which that's really helping out here. But that takes a lot of time, man. Like, let me
Oh,
tell you.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you went to college.
I did, yeah. I actually majored in journalism
Oh
at
wow,
Stephen Preston.
okay. Then you
Yeah,
know what
yeah,
it's like. Uh,
yeah, yeah.
no, it's a lot of fun, but it takes a lot of your time. I'm like, I've been inching through some of my more recent books that I've been reading, so that just I also picked some a bit dense books to read, so that's always fun. But I going back to, hopefully this is a good segue, but I remember watching an interview of yours. Like, I found one on YouTube. Someone was interviewing you. I don't remember who it was, but you kind of mentioned this earlier. But you started All Things Left Wild, and like, well, you mentioned. I'll just get to the point. So, did you always want to write, or you mentioned earlier that you just kind of started All Things Left Wild while you were out living off the grid? Was that just something that you wanted to do just because you wanted to do it, or was it something you always wanted to do, or?
I, a little bit in between, right? I
Mm,
mean, when I was like really young, I wanted to be a writer because it was something that I was told I was good at. I knew I enjoyed reading, I enjoyed writing. But as I got a little older, growing up where I did in East Texas, rural part of the country, I did not have any, we talk about representation and how and why it matters, right? I
mm-hmm.
didn't have any representation to show me that that was a viable career choice, right? Like to me, the publishing industry and authors and all that, that's all something that happens in New York City. There was no tangible or practical way for me to get from Lufkin, Texas to the publishing industry. And
Mm-hmm.
so, what I did know is I knew some people that worked at the Lufkin Daily News, and I knew that I was the editor of my school newspaper. So I thought, well, I'll just be a journalist, right? It just kind of makes sense. And so I got a job at the Lufkin Daily News when I was 18, like basically fresh out of high school, and also went to college while I was working there. So I went to college during the day and then worked nights at the Lufkin Daily News as the night reporter. And also I was young and idealistic, and I thought journalism is going to change the world, and we get, like a truth seeker and all these things.
And then you realize it's like then you realize you just busted into a wall, and you're like, oh, it's
well,
like
a little
The
bit,
Wire.
kind of. Yeah. So like the journalism stuff kind of pushed me towards the political realm a little bit more. And I ended up at the Texas State Capitol as a legislative director, worked for a state representative there for a little bit, and then worked for some state agencies, some lobby firms. And I always have to caveat, when I say I worked for a lobby firm, I was a lobbyist. I was lobbying for water conservation, right? Not for like, I don't know, big tobacco or anything. Like I was lobbying for folks to save water, and to develop water infrastructure, because that's such an important thing, as you know, in this part of the country. Our water resources are scarce, and we've got to kind of do everything we can to make sure that we can meet our needs in the future. But so I was doing these things, and it was just so, I don't know what the right word, just soul sucking, right? Like when you have
It wasn't
things
satisfying.
like, it was not, because there was so much pushback, and it always came back to partisan politics or greed or money, or just, I mean, all the things that kind of malign our political process. They work their way down to the state and local level too, and it was just, yeah, it was just really disheartening, I guess, because I was very idealistic. I was very, let's all hold hands and like and make the world a better place. And it just, I wasn't finding that. And my wife at the time was, she was selling real estate in Austin, and she was doing well, but she also felt this whole like, pull of like the rat race and everything. And so anyway, all that is to say that like one day she was like, let's just donate all of our stuff and just go and just get out of here and go off grid and basically find ourselves, right? And we used that time to kind of really try to figure out what we wanted to do with our lives, what we wanted out of life. And it was during that time that I wrote All Things Left Wild. And to your question, while I was writing it, my thought was, if I can just finish this, because I had started novels before and never got close to finishing, or I had, written short stories, and maybe I'd get a short story published in a magazine and go, yay. And there's nothing wrong with that, but then I never like followed up on that, like I never did anything to give it a chance to be an actual career. And so I didn't, like, in other words, I didn't write short stories that all kind of thematically tied together that I could put in a collection or anything like that. So there was no reason for me to ever query an agent or approach a publisher.
You couldn't do like a knock 'em stiff,
Right, right. And so anyway, I was like, if I can just finish this, then I will be so satisfied in knowing that even if it just sits in a drawer for the rest of my life, I finished something. I finished a novel, and I'll have that, and maybe my kids or grandkids can pull it out of a drawer someday and read it. But then once I finished, I'm like, okay, well, what would it hurt to query some agents? And even if all I do is get rejection letters, at least I'll have tried that. Jenny Zong, who's a wonderful author based here in Texas, she said something at a conference that I thought was just wonderful. She said, if you're afraid of submitting, right? Like you're afraid of querying agents, or you're afraid of submitting your manuscript, what you fear is that it won't be good enough, or that it won't get picked up for publication. But if you don't submit, then you're already living in that world anyway. You're living in the world in which your manuscript is not being published. So why not take the chance? And then even if nothing happens, then there is no change, right? You're still in the same world that you were in. And I kind of dug that. I thought that was pretty good. And so anyway, that's kind of how I felt. I was like, well, I might as well query these agents, because wouldn't it be cool if I could be a writer? So all that's a really long way of saying, like, I always wanted to be a writer. I never knew if it was practical. And up until the moment that I had a publishing deal, I still wasn't sure if it was practical. And then I'll go even further and say, right now, sitting here as we talk, I still don't know if it's practical. Like, I don't know if it's sustainable, right?
Yeah.
At any point, my publisher could go, you know what? The books aren't selling the way that we want them to, so we're going to drop you. And I could write another book and try to get another publisher, and maybe that works out, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe I self-publish, and maybe that works out, and maybe it doesn't. Like, it's just being any kind of creative person, as you know, is being in a constant state of uncertainty when it comes to, can I make money off this? Can I make a sustainable living off this? And that's just part of the deal, right? And that's why so many people say, like, whatever your craft or your creative outlet is, if you're going to try to make it your career, you have to really, really love it. Because at the end of the day, it's just you and the only thing that doesn't change is sitting down and writing. And so no matter what my situation is, no matter what my circumstances are, if I can enjoy sitting down and writing, then I'll be okay. The other stuff will take care of itself, or it won't. And that's okay too, because I still get to sit down and write. Even if that means sitting down and writing for an hour and then going to a temp job somewhere or whatever, because I still have to make money to put food on the table and pay the bills. That's okay. I'll never stop, writing, even if I don't get to do it full time.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm sure you can. If something goes wrong, you can still flex. Be like, yeah, I got published. Huh?
Yeah, sure. You're 100% right. There are things that once they happen, they can never take it away from you, right? Like,
yeah.
So, and you need that sometimes. I think, like, I have to remind myself, like, because it's easy to have imposter syndrome. It's easy to lose confidence when you're, creating things. And so, yeah, I definitely, every now and then, I'll go and look at those Spur Awards and go, yeah, you know what? They can't, even if I never publish another word, I've got the awards. They can't take them from me. So that happened, and that's a cool experience. But as is wont to happen with human beings, I definitely admit that, like, each little small step up the ladder I take, I kind of want more, right? My wife always makes fun of me because I'll be like, oh, if I could just finish this book, I'll be happy. Well, if I could just get an agent, I'll be happy. If I could just get a publishing deal, I'll be happy. If I could just sell
the goals are always shifting, yeah.
Yeah, and it's always, so at some point you do have to kind of, pull yourself back in and go, okay, wait a minute. You can want these things and you can strive for them, but if they don't happen, you have to be okay with it, because you can't control those things, right? Those are things that are out of your control. So a lot of it comes down to, like, life philosophy and self-discipline and self-help and emotional regulation. I mean, they don't tell you these things, Britton. They don't, nobody tells you this when you just want to write a book and publish it. It's like, no, dude, you've got to do a lot of, like, mental health practice and stuff. And, when you put something out in the world and hundreds, if not thousands of people are commenting on it, either good or bad, that can do something to your ego either way, right? Either inflated or deflated. And you've got to protect yourself against those things, or else it's going to seep its way into the creative process, which you certainly don't want that. Because again, then it's not true. Then it's not real. Anyway, I'm rambling. I sound like one of those artists who's like, oh, it's all about the process, man.
Yeah, no, I remember. I mean, hell, Cormac McCarthy didn't really get it big, for lack of a better phrase, until, like, All the Pretty Horses. So I mean,
that's right. The Orchard Keeper came out in 1964, I think. Sometime in the 1960s. I think it was 64. And then it was 1992 when All the Pretty Horses came out, and that was, like, the first time that he truly, became Cormac McCarthy. And it's like, dude, 30 years? You did this for 30 years, man. And even now Blood Meridian, considered one of the great American novels. But when it came out, I want to say that was 1985, I think. When that came out, it didn't even sell, I don't think, 2,000 hardcover copies, right? And so yeah, I mean, it's debatable, and I love having this debate with friends on whether or not somebody like Cormac McCarthy could, or a career like his could be replicated now,
I mean,
right? Because it's like, what publisher would keep an author for 30 years if none of their books ever sold? You know what I mean? Like I don't know. I can't see that
I
happening.
think a lot of it has to do with luck. I mean, he was very lucky to have. Was Erskine the guy who used to work with Faulkner? Because I know he worked with a guy who
Yes.
worked with
Yep.
Faulkner for a long
Yep.
time.
That's it. Yep. Albert Erskine worked with Faulkner, and then kind of right after Faulkner passed away, McCarthy comes in. I mean, it was almost like a true like passing of the torch. But yeah, and he worked with McCarthy all the way up until All the Pretty Horses. At which point he kind of done his job, right? He was like, I got this guy finally to a place where he's about to be huge and everybody's going to read his stuff, and that's what I've been screaming about for 30 years, you know. So, but yeah,
Though,
McCarthy was lucky to have him.
I'll try to be fair here. I mean, imagine in 1985, you look at the bookstore and you see Blood Meridian. You're like, oh, that looks interesting, and then you pick it up and you start reading it. You're like, what the hell? You know, because it's.
Well, yeah, and I mean,
I've read it multiple times, and even I don't know if I understand all of what he's going on about. He's just.
Well, and also to your point, like I want to say, what you just read Lonesome Dove, right? So Lonesome Dove, I think, came out in 1988, maybe. So it's a similar time period, and you've got Lonesome Dove on one hand and Blood Meridian on the other. Well, which one is the more enjoyable novel? Which one is the more, you know, plot-driven novel? I mean, Blood Meridian, my God, there's hardly any plot there, whereas Lonesome Dove, it's majority plot and character and all of those things. And so yeah, I mean, I get it. I'm absolutely with you on like what kind of like the reading public would gravitate towards.
I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I mean, you know.
No, of course, same here. I think we're on the same page. But all that is to say, like, could you ever, you know, do you think that type of career could ever be mirrored where you're writing something like Blood Meridian, you're writing something like, oh, Child of God, like Necrophilia.
Hey, there's people writing about that nowadays. That could happen.
Well, that's true. And then all of a sudden you have a hit like All the Pretty Horses, and everything. It's like, you know, all of his books all of a sudden became, you know, bestsellers because everybody's going, hey, this guy's pretty good, you know.
And McCarthy's just sitting like, oh, you waited 30 years to figure that out, you bastards.
I so want to know. I so wish that, like, when he did that Oprah interview and she asked how he felt about millions of people reading his books, and said he was fine with it and he didn't really care either way. You know, it's moments like that I want.
That man is an enigma, to be honest with you, or he was.
I want a lie detector hooked up to him, right? Like I kind of believe him just based on his entire life, right? Like he never really did seek out any kind of notoriety or publicity, and so I get that, but at the same time, it's like, dude, you're not you're not a little bit happy that, you know, that finally like your lifelong craft is, you know, everything that you've worked on for 40, 50, 60 years is now being not just read but celebrated. That doesn't make you feel kind of good. He just kind of sits back and says, I'm fine with it. And I'm like, man, you're right. Enigma is a great word because I mean, exactly
I don't know. I mean, what I've gathered from what I've read about him, which is a lot. I kind of view that he kind of thought of writing as like a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
I don't know if, and I don't know if he knew how to describe it. I don't know if it was like a pension thing where he's just this kind of weird oddball who just kind of he's somewhere. We don't know where he is. We know he exists because there's photos of him, but
well, by most accounts, you know, McCarthy was a very personable, like if people that had been to dinner with him or been in social situations, everyone said he was not awkward, not kind of this oddball. Even in other words, he was fine. He just, the one thing he didn't, to your point, he was like, no, writing, he didn't want to talk about writing. Like, you know, if I've heard from other authors who had ended up in the same, you know, place as him, and they're like, yeah, that, like, you would try to bring up his work and he would just kind of, you know, politely change the subject or bring it back around to what somebody else was talking about or a different topic,
Maybe
and it's
he
like, yeah,
didn't know how to talk about it. I have no idea. I
yeah,
never met the man,
yeah.
unfortunately,
Well,
before he passed.
I really like the way that you describe it. I think that he probably did view his craft as somewhat of a spiritual experience, and that can be a strange thing to talk about. And also, if you talk about it, it sometimes can make it feel less real, less intimate, less spiritual. And
Hmm.
so maybe he wanted to protect that at all costs,
Again,
which makes sense.
I'm theorizing here. I have no idea, but I don't know what he
I think it's a
did.
great theory.
I mean, I don't know what he did to create those great works. I mean, I haven't read all of them. I'm actually hoping to read Outer Dark next month, because next month is usually when I really go nuts on horror. And I guess technically how Outer Dark isn't horror, but I've heard it has horror elements in it. So
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think with Outer Dark, because it was his second novel, but I think it's the first time that we really see just how grim and dark. Because with the Orchard Keeper, you see his the extent of his beautiful prose, his lyricism, certainly his Faulkner-esque stuff, which really it's really funny because like the New York Times, I think it was when Orchard Keeper came out, they basically were like, the kid's got talent, we can see it, but he's a little too much mimicking Faulkner right now. And then you kind of see from as he continues to write, you see him go from mimicking Faulkner to really coming into his own, because it's like he had that voice, he just had to find it. And with Orchard Keeper, I think we get the first true look at it. The villains in that book, this kind of triad of I don't know, darkness that kind of lurk in that book, is just it's shades of what we're going to get later with the Judge and Anton Chigurh and
mm.
all this stuff. But
That's
yeah,
what I've
it's just
heard.
it's
That's what interested me about it, because like I've read Child of God, and I read Suttree last year,
yeah.
which were two very. I liked. I'll admit I'm not as big of a fan of Child of God as yeah. It's beautifully written. I just was kind of like, okay, yeah, this is fine. I do
Yeah,
want to. I do.
I'm with you on that.
I
I
do want to
think
read it again, maybe see if it changes. But I mean, it's
yeah,
still good. Man didn't write bad books, as far as I'm concerned. But
agreed. Yeah,
um,
absolutely
I
agreed.
mean, I haven't read Orchard Keeper or the Passenger duology yet, because like
Yeah.
it's one of those, and Cities of the Plain, because I read The Crossing earlier this
Oh,
year.
I love Cities of the Plain so much. But I mean, I am with you. I love them all in their own way. I'm like, I can't really, I don't think I can speak like unbiasedly on it, because I'm just such a fan of McCarthy. But like, yeah, like Child of God, when I read that, it's usually to try to pick up some little, trick of language or sentence structure or pacing, because yeah, that's definitely my least favorite in terms of like storyline.
It's just kind
But
of, here's the study of this guy.
yeah,
He goes progressively crazier as he starts, like he goes from like kidnapping bodies to murdering people, and then kidnapping their bodies, and then he just gets shot and dies, or he gets his arm chopped off and he dies, and it's just like,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. You can look at it
It's
as
more like, it's more of a inane or banal type of evil than like the Judge or Anton Chigurh, who are like these, just they're not even
I agree.
human. They're just like these forces of nature.
I completely
While
agree. Yeah,
Ballard is
there's
more like human, I guess.
yes, yeah. There's a demiurge type quality to Chigurh and the Judge that's like almost there's a lot of text about McCarthy's work comparing it to like Gnostic
I've heard that,
philosophy. And
yeah.
yeah, and I think that's when it is really strongest, is with those characters in those novels. And
I mean, you know how sad I am? I've read like academic critical articles, or not critical, but just like articles about Blood Meridian, and they've talked about, oh, maybe the Judge is this Gnostic being, and you're like,
yeah.
what? Yeah.
Oh, hey, if you're sad, then I'm plumb depressed, because that's half of my bookshelf is McCarthy, and not just all 10 or I guess 12 now of his novels, but all of every academic analysis I can get my hands on, any kind of critical response, any kind of new take, whether it's McCarthy and the Book of Job, McCarthy and his landscapes and how they work into his text. Certainly the Gnostic stuff. There's a great book. You may have read it. It's called.
I'll admit, I haven't read any of like books about like McCarthy's work or what people think about it. I've only read like articles and like watched videos on like YouTube. I mean, not that I'm against. I mean, I'm a McCarthy nut, so I'll probably pick it up at some point. But
there's a book called A Bloody and Barbarous God by Petra Mundik, and it is. I mean, there's some really good McCarthy analysis out there, but to me, that's kind of like the holy grail of, or like the Rosetta Stone to a lot of McCarthy's work. It's about the metaphysics of his writing, and it just every time that I need like a little hit of wildness, I just turn to that book over and over again. It's so good. But anyway, yeah, we could talk about McCarthy forever.
I know, yeah, it's a he's a touchstone for me in a lot of ways. I remember I was one of those. I remember I was first interested. I was a kid and I saw a poster for The Road. I'm like, oh, what's that?
Yeah.
And then I ended up like picking it up, and I was just like, whoa, that was weird. What was that?
Yep. It was All the Pretty Horses for me was the first McCarthy book that I read, and it was just so unlike anything else that I'd ever read. And I had read a lot of Westerns too, and I think maybe that was part of it is I was a fan of the Western and a fan of the genre, and to see it just painted in such an incredibly beautiful but also real and heavy and formidable way, like I don't know, it felt like that book had a weight to it that no Western that I ever read had even come close to. And I had read Lonesome Dove. I had read some of McMurtry's work. To me, McMurtry is a little bit the enigma because there's so much of his writing that I love and so much that I'm just kind of lukewarm on.
Before I read Lonesome Dove this year, I had only seen adaptations of his work. Like I saw The Last Picture Show, the Bogdanovich movie, and I watched it a couple years ago for a college class, and I just don't know if I got it because I'm like, man, this is kind of sad and like just I don't get it. Like I don't know what the point of this is.
Yeah,
life sucks. Getting older sucks. I think it's getting older sucks.
That's kind of that's actually maybe this says more about me, but that's the stuff that I like in McMurtry's work, and the stuff I connect to is kind of that like high lonesome feeling of not nostalgia, but like this like passing by of time and not really grasping a purpose in a way, but somehow having to come to terms with that. So like his first novel, Horsemen Pass By. To me, it's his best novel. I really like The Last Picture Show, and of course, I do love Lonesome Dove.
I was about to say, I loved it. I thought Lonesome Dove was great. I'm like, I see why people love this so much. Okay, I'm in.
But Horseman Pass By for me was his first. It was his best. I think he wrote it when he was like 24 or 25, which is just disgusting how good it is and how insightful it is. But yeah, to me, that's the closest that he came to like the perfect novel, and it's so dang good. And then I don't know, but then and I also have to kind of try to separate McMurtry the literary legend from McMurtry the man, because like by all accounts, like depending on when you caught him or what time or what mood he was in, he could be a little crotchety and he could be pretty rude to people. But then he could also, again, this is all just based on essays that other people have written about him and observations from other people. But like he could also be really great to be around, and it just kind of depended on when you caught him. But and he also said some really not nice things about some really great writers that I really admire, like McCarthy. McMurtry said that he wasn't sure that McCarthy had ever written a truly good book. To me, that's insane. He also was not very kind to J. Frank Dobie and some other Texas literary legends
I feel like he criticized somebody. I don't remember who it was. It was somebody, I guess. I don't know.
He could be pretty unforgiving with his with his criticism, but the other side of that is he just took it really seriously. And even if I don't agree with his opinions or his, his conclusions, I do respect the fact that he was such a serious writer and reader.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he put everything that he had into it, and it's really hard to fault anybody for that.
It's kind of funny. I would actually compare McCarthy or McMurtry to McCarthy in a little way. I think that I would probably say he's more traditional than McCarthy is in terms of like how he writes.
Yeah, sure.
McCarthy is like a surreal. It's an experience.
Right. Yeah.
While with McMurtry, it's more of a. But they cover a lot of similar themes.
Absolutely.
Like the inherent brutality of the world, and you don't ever get what you want, and that's more of a McMurtry thing. But
yeah, well, I mean, in the passing by, not just of time, but of like certain ways of life.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of what happens to masculinity when it's left behind. Like, I agree with you. I think they definitely cover similar territory.
I remember when I read All the Pretty Horses, which was actually last year. I really liked it a lot. And I mean, I've thought about making this video, but like where to start with McCarthy. I would probably put All the Pretty Horses on that list because it's pretty accessible for the most part. But I'm like, this kind of reminds me of Last Picture Show a little bit, just in terms of
absolutely
just how kind of like there's this. They both take place in Texas. That probably helps a lot.
Sure.
Which like there's a similar dryness. There's a similar like bleak. Like. This seems like something that like Jeff Bridges' character and the main kid from the movie. This seems like something they might do if they were a bit more foolhardy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a similar yearning, I think, right? Like these young people who are yearning for something more, but at the same time, the only thing that they've ever known is something that's in the past. Is this this way of life that's changing, and so. I mean, I don't know. I'm with you. I think thematically, I think they cover a lot of the same territory for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
both do it well. They do it in different ways, craft wise, like you said. Like their prose is different, their approach is different, but it's both effective as far as I'm concerned.
Which I mean, it's interesting. I think I remember reading somewhere McCarthy actually liked the miniseries of Lonesome Dove. I don't know if you've heard of this, and I'm like, oh man. I know he was kind of coy about like other novels, unless it was by like Faulkner and Dostoevsky or whatever.
Right.
But like, I would think that he would like Lonesome Dove if he had ever gotten around to reading it, because they cover a lot of similar things, or at least I think so. Again, I just think McMurtry's more of a traditional writer, which again, nothing wrong with that, but that's just that's a. Reading McCarthy is a much different beast than reading McMurtry,
I agree. Oh, I completely agree. But yeah. Well, Britton, I appreciate you having me on, man. But I'm going to show you something. My office is now also my son's crib room.
Oh, dear. I see that.
and it is almost bedtime for the little man, so... I'm gonna have to get out of here. Do you want to do one more question and then?
Yeah, sure. That sounds good. I did want to ask you before we left because as much as I enjoy talking about McCarthy, which is a lot, who are some other writers that you enjoy?
Yeah, man. So for me, all of everything that William Gay has written intrigues me in some way or another. I think that he. Again, we go back to like I have the McCarthy comparisons. I don't think that they're warranted in terms of like actually getting close to McCarthy. I think it's just like, people only know a few authors and they're like, oh, James Wade is kind of like Cormac McCarthy, and like I guess that could be true in like a very broad and liberal sense. But to me, William Gay is as close as anybody has come to actually. Approaching McCarthy level prose.
Mm-hmm.
So I love everything that he wrote. Kent Harif is another author who I love.
I guess when I compared you to McCarthy, I was talking more about the feel of it.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I don't think it's like a bad thing at all. I just.
Also, I will admit there were some parts, which is why I didn't get a 5-star, but. There were some parts where I'm like, yeah, he hasn't quite moved, he hasn't quite found his own voice yet.
Exactly. No, exactly. And like I said, I think that is not just a fair critique, but an accurate one. And but for somebody like William Gay or Kent Harif, like these guys who have they're able to take McCarthy tendencies and then turn them into their own thing. I think it's wonderful. Taylor Brown, to mention somebody who's actually alive. So often people are like, "Who are you reading?" And I'm like, "A bunch of people that are dead." But Taylor Brown is, I mean, he's one of the best, in my opinion, best living writers that we have. Lauren Groff is incredible. Northwoods by is it Daniel Mason? Yeah, that was like that book knocked my socks off. I don't, it's always tough because it's like I feel like almost every book I read brings something worthy and worthwhile to my life in some kind of way, and so really just like I just people just need to read, man. You know it. Like we gotta find time to do it because I just think it makes us more well-rounded people. I think it you know, even to the smallest degree, it kind of, toggles our way of thinking a little bit. But yeah, I don't know. I would tell everybody to go buy a book by Taylor Brown and just let him absolutely, rock your world, man. He's one of the best out there doing it right now.
Well, I will ask you one last thing. It's a Texas-related question.
Okay.
You mentioned you're from East Texas. Have you read Joe Lansdale? Because I love him a lot.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The Bottoms is probably my favorite thing from Lansdale that I've read. I was fortunate enough to share a sushi meal with Joe and his wife
Oh,
some
very
years
cool.
back, and he's just he's super gracious guy. But yeah, everything he writes is good. But Joe is kind of like you described Blackstone earlier about kind of publishing things all over the map.
Mm-hmm.
That's Joe. I mean, the dude can, and he told me that like early in his career, publishers were like, you need to stick to one thing. And he was like, no, I don't want to do that. So, I mean, he's written everything from Batman comics to horror to crime. He does series, he does standalone novels.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of the most prolific writers ever. And certainly the writer that put East Texas kind of on the map, but yeah, the Bottoms for me is probably my favorite Lansdale work. Although Night Runners, oh my God, that was one of his earlier novels. Really cool horror novel. But yeah, I love everything he does, and of course he's got a movie, the Thicket.
Yeah, I read the book to that.
It,
I've thought about picking
yeah,
up the movie, seeing the
yeah,
movie.
it just came out or is about to come out, and based on his novel. So yeah, love Joe, dude. You can't be from East Texas and not love Lansdale, and you can't be like a Texas, grit lit type of reader or writer and not love Lansdale. I mean, he's just our guy, right? Like he's the North Star, I think, for a lot of Texas writers.
Well, all right, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's fair. I really like his. He has a very interesting style, I think. But I'll ask you one last thing about Texas, if you'll indulge me a little bit. But this is
Sure.
kind of just kind of me kind of being salty about Oklahoma and Texas. Why do you think Texas holds such a fascination for writers? I'll let you answer that real quick,
Okay.
and then I'll let you go.
I mean, I think it's so many things.
Mm-hmm.
But the history in Texas is so unique comparatively, right?
Oh yeah, it was its own country at one point.
Exactly, right? Like you've got this cultural storm. Like when somebody says Texas, people immediately get certain images in their mind. Certainly the size of the state, the diversity of the landscape, the diversity of the culture. I mean, in East Texas, where I'm from, it is more in line with Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi in terms of like topography, flora, and fauna. And then you come out west and it becomes the more, like rolling plains and all that stuff. And so, I don't know. I think something about the grandness of it. I think something about like that,
it's a big
the
state.
attitude. Yeah. The attitude of like the individualism, like we can make it on our own, the ruggedness. I mean, and a lot of it is stuff that is like, has really been idolized in a way that was probably never really accurate. We talk a lot nowadays about what is a cowboy like. There, I mean, that was the Lonesome Dove days, right? Like the cattle drives and all that stuff. That was maybe 2 decades of history, maybe. Like that's being pretty kind. And then you had the railroad come in, and you didn't really need any of that stuff. You just put the cows on the trains. But yeah, I mean, I think there's just a lot of mythology and lore that surround Texas, that people really romanticize in a way, and sometimes it's good, sometimes not so much. But yeah, I think that Texas has become it has basically been a self-fulfilling prophecy of its own mythos and its own romanticism, and yeah, I mean I think that's all I got. It's we'll see what happens in the future as the state becomes more diverse, and the histories that have been told become a little less one-sided. I think there's still a lot of rich cultural history and a lot of storytelling that has yet to be explored and yet to be uncovered in Texas. So I think we're still going to have a lot of great writers for generations to come. As long as there's books, I feel like there'll be Texans writing them.
Yeah, no, it's I also asked that because I'm kind of jealous that Oklahoma doesn't have as many great books from our area. We have The
Hey,
Outsiders.
y'all have the Turnpike Troubadours, okay? So
Yeah,
y'all are fine.
but anyway, James, thanks for coming on here. I'm glad we finally got this together. It's been fun, and maybe we could do this again at some point. I don't know.
I love that so much, Britton. I really enjoy talking to you, man. I just absolutely I think we have very similar tastes in our books and our culture and what we consume, and it's just always fun to talk to somebody like that. So hey, the thanks is all to you, man. I appreciate you giving me this chance to visit with you and the folks that watch your channel. So I'm one of those folks. So I'll be watching in the future, and here's to 100 more episodes, man.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. If you have any social media, feel free to share it. I know you don't. I mean, I don't mean to chime in and speak for you, but I think you mainly use Instagram.
Yeah. If anybody wants to come see what's going on with me and writing and all that stuff, it's at James Wade Writer on Instagram. So give me a follow, and I'll follow you back, and that's the way it goes, man. So thank you guys so much, and thank you, Britton. It really means a lot, man.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Check out James's books. They're quite. I've only read one of them, so the one I read was pretty good. Until next time, hope you guys enjoyed this.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Britton.